Hello, welcome to a new Oxygen XML webinar. My name is George Bina, and I will be your host today. And I invited my colleague Stephen Higgs to present on an interesting topic. I think getting started with Oxygen, because this is useful for people that are new to Oxygen, but I think it's also useful for people that already use Oxygen, because at any time you can discover, something that can be done a bit differently, that can improve your productivity. I always like to going back to basics from time to time. So before Stephen will start his presentation, let me go through some of the useful information related to the webinar. And the question that we receive almost all the time is whether the webinar will be recorded or not. And the answer is yes, the webinar is recorded, and as we record all our webinars, and we make them available on the corresponding event page, as well as on the Oxygen XML YouTube channel. The other question is, when you can ask and how you can ask questions. So you should be able to ask questions at any time, and that's probably the best thing to do, because otherwise you may forget about that question. And you can do that using the questions panel into the GoToWebinar interface, or in case you are using Twitter, you can also address them to the Oxygen XML account, or mark them with the Oxygen XML hashtag, and we will monitor them as well, and we can answer them. At the end of the webinar, we have also some time reserved for responding to your questions. So we'll try to respond privately to the questions as we go on the respective channel, but then at the end we will go through the questions and answer them so anyone can get those answers. That being said, let me make Stephen presenter so he can start his presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen Higgs. Hi, Stephen.
Hello, what a reception. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending. And as more people are joining, I will provide a short intro. So as George said, one of the common things that users, CMS integrators, and others in the XML community have mentioned in regards to Oxygen is that new users are sometimes intimidated by the interface and they aren't exactly sure where to start. And we've also received requests to provide more getting started type of tutorials, whether they be videos or user guide topics. Well, the tricky thing is that Oxygen has been in development for almost 20 years, and there are so many different things that you can do, so many different types of users, so many different goals that different users want to accomplish, that it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what such a tutorial should cover. And I do plan to add more tutorial topics in the Getting Started chapter in our user guide for various tasks. But in the meantime, we decided that a webinar might be the best method to provide help to new users, since we can show a variety of things and in a more fluid manner. So I tried to think back of when I first started using Oxygen to put together a list of things I think new users would want to see. And I'm going to try to keep it fairly basic and general, and of course try to reach the broadest audience possible, but I will also show you some very specific things and things that are probably more for people who have at least been using Oxygen for a little while. Now, there's no way that I could possibly anticipate what everyone will want to see. So at the end of my presentation, we will do something a little bit different than what we normally do. In addition to answering questions, you can also request that we show you something specific that I didn't show during the webinar. So towards the end, you can enter your request also in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar interface. And if it's something that we can show and we have a usable example, either myself or George will show it, or in the very least explain it. And of course, it needs to be Oxygen related. For example, if you're using a CMS that has Oxygen integrated into their application, we have no way of showing anything that pertains to their interface or their customizations, but we'll do our best. Also, keep in mind that I'm using version 21.0 in case you see something that your version doesn't have. So the agenda. First, I'll discuss various resources that are out there to help new users. And then I'll open Oxygen and start showing you a variety of things I thought might be useful for new users. And it was very difficult to come up with a logical order as well for what to show you, but I did my best. It's a little tricky because, for example, one logical starting point would be to offer an overview of the interface, but it's dynamic and many things depend on the type of document or project you're working with. So I can't really discuss the interface without first opening various types of documents. So I decided to start with discussing the sample project that comes bundled with Oxygen and the editor for the various document types and various modes. And then I'll show you various interface components, how to configure the editing experience. Then I'll show you some more specific tasks using generic docbook documents, and many of these things will be similar in various document types. And since DITA is probably the most popular XML authoring format, I'll show you some tasks, features, and actions that were implemented specifically for DITA users. I'll briefly show you a few commonly used features in the tools menu, and last I'll show you some ways to migrate non-XML documents to XML, since this is one of the most commonly asked questions for users that are new to Oxygen or XML. So first, resources that are available to you. And most of these are available directly from the website, our website, in either the resources page or in our documentation, or even the support page where you can ask questions or seek help. And I will show you what I'm talking about. So on the oxygenxml.com website, we have this resources page. And if you go to other resources, you'll see that there's some discussion lists and resources for learning and training, DITA, XSLT, DocBook, Schematron, XML Schema, RelaxNG, and there's various links for tutorials and more. Also, we have all of our documentation in the documentation page. All of them are in web help form, and some of them are also in PDF format. We also have a blog page, and there's a lot of useful information here. You can expand these on the right over here to see the most recent ones, or you can even search for something specific. And you'll see there's some blog posts in the past that are sort of related to what we're talking about. Here's some authoring tips that might be helpful for DITA users. This is a very interesting blog for DITA-oriented tips and tricks. And there's some generic things that are true for all types of documents. For example, you can use Control and the plus or minus key to increase or decrease the font, or Command and plus or minus on Mac. And we also have videos page. And this presents all the videos that we've created, starting from most recent and back. And there's various filtering options and categories. And as George mentioned, all the webinars are recorded. They're also stored here, so you can see all the webinars, the past webinars here as well. But as George mentioned, you can also go to the events page and you'll see upcoming events, but you can go to past events, and this will show the most recent webinars and also presentations that we've done at various conferences and whatnot. And I want to point out this particular webinar that my colleague Radu did back in December. It was a webinar about tips and tricks, particularly for functionality that users may not be aware of. And I think this is very useful for new users, but also for experienced users. You'll see all sorts of things that you may not have been aware of. And some of the things that I will be showing you in this webinar, Radu went into much more detail or showed more advanced functionality in this webinar. So it would be a good place to, or a good webinar to watch as well. Next, let's go back to the documentation. So in our user guide, we have a getting started chapter, and you might find some useful things there. Again, I plan to add a lot more tutorial type of stuff in this chapter, but this particular resources topic has some resources. Some of them overlap with what you saw on our website, but some of them are unique. And there's information about the help menu, but I'll discuss that. I also want to draw your attention to this topic because this is a very commonly asked question. People often ask if there's a way to print the shortcut keys that you can use in Oxygen. Quickly, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So in our options menu, there's menu shortcut keys, and this dialog box shows all the shortcut keys that are available, and you can configure them. But there's no way to print this. And we've discussed making a simple way of exporting it so that you can print or work with it. But in the meantime, you have this user guide topic, and you can print this or export this HTML page and create your own table if you want. Maybe, for example, filter it to only show the shortcut keys that you use. And you'll notice that someone has even requested that we add another one to the list. So for the next version, I'll add this request to this list of frequently used shortcuts. Okay, so now I'll open Oxygen and start showing you some things. So this is what Oxygen looks like when you first install it. And you notice that in the welcome screen, it has some links to resources that we've already talked about and various other helpful things. And notice that in the project view over on the left, there's a sample project already loaded. This sample project comes bundled with Oxygen. It's a sample folder that includes all sorts of different types of documents to help you view and get started with certain types of tasks and documents. And when we add new features, we often add samples in this folder. For example, if you want some inspiration for how to use or create form controls, you could use the samples in this form controls folder, or there's samples for quick fixes. Some of the main built-in frameworks, DITA, DocBook, TEI, and XHTML have an image map editor that was added in the last few years. And so there's samples in each of those folders for image map if, for example, you want to test that feature. And FYI, in case you already had Oxygen installed or you had other sample or other projects open and you weren't aware of the sample folder, I will show you that it's in your installation folder. It's the samples folder, and all those documents are stored here. And this XPR file is the project file that you would open in your project view if you wanted to open that project. I often open files from my file explorer because I don't want to switch projects. And so I often use files from the sample folder without switching in the project view. So for each type of document, Oxygen detects the document type and has a specialized editor and default layout for each type of document. So for an XSLT document, this is what the editor and layout looks like. For an XML schema, actually by default, it usually opens in this design mode, but this is how it looks. If I opened a different type of schema, like a Relax NG schema, you see that it has a slightly different layout. If I open, I don't know, a CSS file, it's even more basic. A generic XML file. And each of these document types, well, many of the document types have various modes. You'll see at the bottom you have text mode or grid mode, and this displays the XML content in a grid of nested tables and cells. And author mode. And author mode is CSS based. So this XML file happens to reference a CSS file. So it's able to render it in author mode. If I say commented this out and then tried to go to author mode, doesn't look very good. And again, it depends on the type of document. Again, the XML schema has a design mode in addition to text and grid. And the author mode isn't as nearly as helpful as the design mode for this type of document. Some documents, for example, CSS only has one mode. Of course, it's just a simple text editor. And the 4 fully functional built-in frameworks, DITA, DocBook, TEI, and XHTML, have their own special CSS files that are built into the framework. So if I open a DocBook file, for example, you see that it automatically opens in author mode. And if I go to text, it does not have a CSS file referenced because it's referenced directly in the framework. And there's also a few different perspectives. This editor perspective is what 90% of the people are going to use, but there's also an XSLT debugger perspective, an XQuery debugger, and a database perspective. Those are more advanced, and we have videos on our website that will get you help with those perspectives and modes. And one more thing to mention is you'll notice that when I opened this schema file that it opened in text mode, even though the default is design. That's because the last time I had this file opened, I had switched it to text mode. So Oxygen remembers the mode that you were in when you close the file. So when you reopen the file, it will stay in whatever mode it was in. So you'll notice that each of the files have a tab at the top. And you can move the files by holding down the left mouse button and dragging. It also has contextual menu actions. You notice that moving to the left and right, you can use Control Alt, comma. So do the same thing there. Also, Alt-Tab and Alt-Shift-Tab will shift the focus to the various tabs. If, for example, I have a lot of files open, oops. You'll use these arrows to scroll, and this is a helpful button. You can view all the documents in a vertical sequence. I can also use contextual menu actions such as close files to the right, and there's a variety of other actions here. And if you need to reopen a file that you accidentally closed or something, you can go to the reopen from the file menu, and it lists all the recently opened files. If you only have 2 files open, you could tile the editors horizontally or vertically. You can also maximize the editing area, but you can also do this by double clicking on the tab. And let's stack them again. You can also tile them by dragging them. So there's various ways to work with the tabs and the editors to configure the editing area however you want. As far as the rest of the interface, so we have various menus. All of these are common to all document types, pertain to actions that pertain to the file or editing, find. Oh, and by the way, notice that shortcuts for all these actions are listed in the menu. If the action has a shortcut, keyboard shortcut, it'll list it here. Same with the contextual menu. If the action has a keyboard shortcut, it'll list it in the contextual menu. Find related actions, project, options, tools. And you'll notice that in the docbook, back in this regular XML file, it did not have this menu, but for the docbook, it has a specific docbook menu. And it has specific or docbook specific actions here. This is the same for DITA, XHTML, TEI, all the built-in frameworks. And I want to discuss the help menu a little bit. We have this help feature, the F1. So depending on where you are in the interface, let me open a dialog box, for example. If I open the configure transformation scenarios dialog box, I can either click this question mark down here or hit F1, and it'll open the user guide according to that dialog box or location in the interface. So if I focused on this model view over here and hit F1, it would open a topic about the model view. And we've talked about also adding this functionality for all the actions, like the toolbar actions, but that's a huge project and hasn't happened yet. But for now, dialog boxes, wizards, views, areas and locations in the editing area, this is how you can reach a help topic about that specific location in the interface. Also there's a section for installing and managing add-ons. You can check your version. You can use this dialog box to report a problem, and Whatever you enter here will be sent to our support staff. This action will open the website in the support page. If you need to send files and it has sensitive data, you can use this randomize XML text content option, and you'll see that it's going to convert any text to randomized gibberish, basically. So you can use that if you need to send us files and you don't want to send your text content. Okay, and then each document type also has, like I said, a default layout and common views. Not all views are helpful for everyone, but most documents, you're going to have of course, you're always going to have the project view over on the left. There's the open find resource view. The outline view displays the structure of your XML content, and there's a lot of contextual menu actions. You can also move nodes from here, and you'll notice it's synchronized with the editor. So whatever you do there or select, it also synchronizes in the editing pane. I primarily use this to view the structure or navigate. The attributes view, depending on your location in the file, whatever element you're on, it'll show you the attributes that are allowed based upon the schema. And if it defines specific values for that attribute, you can double click and then it shows you what values are allowed. The model view is helpful, especially for new users, I think, because it shows the current element and it shows it in like a syntax diagram, something that you would see in the specification. And then also there's a window that describes the element, and it also provides a link to the specification. In this case, it's going to the DocBook specification. The elements view, probably not very many people use this, but it lists the elements that are allowed. The entities view can be used if, for example, you need to insert escaped characters or escaped entities. You can use this view. Transformation scenarios view, you can quickly transform documents. It shows the transformation scenarios that are available for this particular document type. And if there's, let's suppose the review view wasn't displayed. If you need to show views that aren't displayed, go to Window, Show View, and all the available views are listed here. And since this document does have tracked changes and comments, it makes sense to have the review view open. And of course, if you need to configure it, this button is to toggle hide. I can toggle it again. This will allow you to float and you can move it around. And if you somehow screw up your layout, you can always go back to, I've done this a million times, you can go back to Window, Reset Layout, and it'll take you back to the original layout. And you see that I don't have the review view open anymore because that was not the default. And of course, the views that you don't use, maybe you want to close them. Only have the views that you really need open. And you can configure this for each project. The toolbar. Let's go back to the generic XML document. So these are all the, let's say, default actions, toolbar actions that are there for all documents depending on the mode. And if you hover over them, they tell you what they are, check spelling, some find actions. This is a helpful action. This will take you back to your last modification. So it takes me back to the document where I had my last modification. The XPath toolbar allows you to do XPath searches. This is the validation menu, figure transformation scenarios. If I reopen that XML document, if, for example, I didn't have a schema specified, I could use this button to associate a schema. Same with CSS. This button, you can associate the CSS file. And you'll notice, so I was in text mode. You don't have as many toolbar buttons in text mode, but back in author mode, then you have these additional toolbars. Oh, let's go back to this one. These common toolbar actions, such as, this is where you can, well, let's go back to the docbook file. Now notice when I switch to the docbook file, it adds more toolbar actions. All of these are docbook specific actions, and it's the same if you open a DITA document, TEI, XHTML, all the fully functional built-in frameworks have their own toolbar with actions. This tag mode display is helpful if you want to change to the display so you can see tags, different modes. This is especially helpful for new users that aren't familiar with the XML markup. This is the profiling menu, and you'll see this later on. You can turn on change tracking, and then anything that you change will be tracked, and you'll also see it in the review view where you have inline actions and contextual menu actions for reacting to the comments and changes, and various other track change type of actions. You have a highlighting tool. This menu gives you options for, so if I change it to view original, it'll show you the document before the track changes and comments. If I change it to view or view final, it'll show you what it would be like if you accepted all of them. And the style menu is helpful, and it's framework specific. So for DocBook, for example, you have this full width option, and it just changes the CSS rendering, the style. Let me switch to a DITA document, and you can see additional styles. So you'll see in DITA, there's a whole bunch of additional styles. These ones above this line are the main styles, so I can, I don't know, change the whole look. And then below are additional CSS styles that are applied on top of the main, and some things that would be helpful for new users. For example, you have these hints. And so in various places in the document, it gives you hints as to what type of content should go there. You also have inline actions to make it easier to insert things in certain locations. So I used to use these CSS styles when I first started learning DITA because it was very helpful, and I used the model view a lot. Now that I'm familiar with it, I don't have to use them as much, but it's particularly helpful when you first get started. And then you can configure the toolbar if you want. So you right-click anywhere in the toolbar area, click configure toolbars, and if, for example, I don't need to show this button, I can deselect it and that action vanished. Or I'll choose to show this toolbar because I'll show you this a little later. And you can also move them around. So for example, so you drag at these vertical dots. You can move all the actions in that toolbar wherever you want. So that's how you configure the toolbar. And various ways to configure the whole editing experience. And you'll find that for you new users out there, once you configure the editing experience exactly how you want it, you probably won't have to continue to configure it as you go. It'll stay that way. There's various options you can configure. So you can reset, import, and export global options. And there's literally hundreds of, maybe thousands of options in the preferences dialog box. So there's a bunch of different pages in here. For example, in global, this is where you would change the language for the interface. In appearance, you could change the look and feel or the theme, for example. You can search. I would think something like changing the font would be a common thing. So if I go to the fonts page, this is where you could change the font and size for the various type of modes. In the save page, there's some helpful options. For example, if you chose to automatically save the document every, I don't know, however often you want, this is definitely helpful for new users. The spell check, you could turn on automatic spell checking. That's definitely helpful for new users, and there's various other options here. And as a child, you can even add custom dictionaries. And there's autocorrect options as well. Now I want to draw your attention to the bottom here. There's global options and project options. And for many of the preferences pages, you can switch it to project options. And then whatever I changed in this particular preferences page will be saved to my project file. And then I can share that project file with other users, and they'll have the same options that I have. And I can select this P icon up here, and it'll show all the pages that I've changed to project options. So that's the preferences pages, other ways to configure the interface. Now let's talk about opening and creating projects and documents. So if I want to open another existing project, I can either do it from the project menu or from this drop-down menu. Open project. I have this project here. It's wanting me to save. Okay. I can also, from those same locations, I can also create a new project. And whatever folder I decide to store it in, let's do it in this one. It already exists, but I'll override it. And notice that it automatically added all the folders and subfolders that were in that location that I specified where I wanted to store it. So that's how you open or create a new project. And then there's obviously various contextual menu actions to, add new folders or files or all sorts of things, remove them, rename. For documents, again, there's various ways. You've already seen me opening files from the project menu just by double clicking them. You can also drag files from your file explorer. It'll open in Oxygen. For creating new files, you can do it from the file menu or this toolbar button. You can choose what type of document you want to create. Some of them have customization options. Probably the best way to create a new document and many things in Oxygen is use the contextual menu, because then it automatically decides the scope for you. In this case, for example, if I want to create a new document in this folder, by using the contextual menu, it's going to store it in that folder. So if I create a new XSLT file, so it automatically stores it in that folder. As far as some editing features, let's open the docbook file again. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the breadcrumb. So depending on where you are in the main editor in the document, the breadcrumb will show you your XML structure from the root element to your current location. This is very helpful. Of course, you can use the outline view and other resources as well, but I use the breadcrumb almost exclusively. And there's contextual menu actions. I use this to configure editing or profiling attributes quite often, or also to rename elements. Those are probably the two most common actions that I use in this menu. But it's helpful to keep track of where you are in the document and what current element you're in without having to look at other views. Probably, well, in my opinion, the most helpful editing feature of all is the Content Completion Assistant. It makes it much faster to create and edit content. In author mode, you just hit enter and it will present all the proposals that are valid at that editing location. The first proposal is going to be what is considered the most common or most logical option. In this case, it thinks that creating a new paragraph would be most logical. I can start typing to find whatever element I'm looking for or proposal. If I select the whole thing and enter, it'll see now it's saying that the most logical choice would be to surround it with something. And you also have the content completion in text mode. In text mode, it's automatically opened when you enter a bracket. Again, it shows you proposals that are valid at that location. And notice that I have a validation error. So as I type in all the modes, it automatically validates. This is saying that it's incomplete. It expects something else. Oops. So I don't know. Now it's complete. Also, some document types, for example, XSLT. If you use control space, it shows all the code templates that are available for that document type. It'll insert an entire structure. I don't know what this is going to do, but I'm not an XSLT expert. Or if I select an element in text mode and again use control space, again it'll offer proposals for replacing that element, something that would be valid there. And there's various quick fixes that are built in. For example, if I create a validation problem here, so I have an example element, and if I add another title, it's going to say that the example should only contain one title element, because I accidentally stayed within the example instead of creating a second example. So if I click on the validation warning, I have this light bulb, or even underneath it, and it'll give me options for automatically fixing it, saying delete the other element. So these are helpful for keeping the document valid and well-formed. Of course, there's a variety of contextual menu actions, submenus in the contextual menu, and block elements. You have folding options so that you can collapse or expand. You even have some contextual menu actions on the folds. And you can even bookmark. So if I add a bookmark here, this is now number 1. I'll go back here, add another bookmark, it's 2. If I use Control 1, it's going to go back to my first bookmark, Control 2, so on. So that's often helpful if you're working with multiple documents at once. Some specific tasks. Let's say we want to insert a table here. Now, most actions in Oxygen, you'll find they have various ways of doing them. So I could use the contextual menu, insert table. It opens this wizard, lets me configure. I could also use the toolbar action that does exactly the same thing, or I could even use the content completion table wizard. And it just all depends on what's most convenient for you or what you're familiar with. A lot of people like toolbar buttons. Some people just like to use the contextual menu all the time, or most of the time, which is what I do. Sometimes people like to use the contextual, or the content completion is what I use most of the time, sorry. Let's say I want to insert an image. Now this is this is a case where, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just something that I first learned to use the toolbar button, but instead of using content completion for inserting an image, I always use the toolbar button. Actually, let's use this one. Again, it's just a matter of what's most convenient and productive for you. If I want to add an image map to this image, this is one particular action that you need to use the contextual menu. So I right-click the image and I have Image Map Editor. And I could add shapes, give it an ID, description, link to whatever cross-reference or web link is required. Remember, I added this character map in the toolbar. If I wanted to insert a special character or symbol, you see some default ones here, but I can click more symbols and this will open this dialog box. And you can see the hexadecimal equivalent or decimal or description. Well, this is how you search, by either hexadecimal, decimal, or description. I'm going to search by description. Let's say I want to insert the Greek capital letter alpha. And you'll see the decimal and hexadecimal values down here. So I insert that, and then the next time, of course, that's not in a valid element. The next time I use that map or that character map, you'll see that that character I just inserted is listed here on this front page because it remembers all your recently used symbols and it keeps adding to this list. So that's helpful for many users. I can easily let's see, I need to save first. I can easily transform my current document in the transformation scenarios view. I can just double click this particular transformation scenario, or I can use the configure transformation scenarios dialog box up here. Do the same thing. Or there's a lot of batch operations. So from the project view, if I want to transform multiple files, I right click, I select the files, right click, select transformation scenario. It does all of them at once. And there's a variety of batch operations as well. There's a lot of search operations in Oxygen. You have the open find resource view. This will search for, it'll search your entire project. In this case, it's in file path. So for example, I want to find all DITA files in my project, my current project, or in the content, all instances of DocBook, or if I switch it to in reviews and don't have anything in the text filter or these options, it'll show all documents that have review items in it. That's sometimes helpful if you're managing a project and have multiple people working on it that are maybe adding comments or adding changes. You'll see in the find menu, most of these actions have shortcuts. So there's a quick find toolbar. Some people find this helpful. You can search for text in the current document. I usually use what's called the find replace dialog box, and it's just Control F. Here again, you can find, and it has various replace operations and some more advanced options. Another helpful thing is maybe I want to search in multiple files. So again, in the project view, select, or it could be a folder or the entire project. But you select your resources, right click, and find replace in files. I use this quite a bit. And for example, say I want to search for, make it case sensitive. And there's a lot of more advanced features here. You can restrict it to an XPath expression. And remember, I told you about that webinar that my colleague did back in December about tips and tricks, and he goes into much more detail about find operations and some more advanced functionality. So if you're interested in learning more about some of these more advanced features of the find replace and whatnot, I encourage you to watch his webinar. So I'm going to replace it with this, and I can find all, I have to save first, and it'll show all the results here. Or if I choose replace all, then I have an option to preview, and it's showing me exactly what is changing in each file. I can click OK, and it replaced 9 instances. So that's very helpful. Of course, you can also actually explain this. So this is a new feature that was, I think it was added last version, where it automatically creates a backup file in case you lose your work. I'm actually going to remove them for now, but you can also, for example, check spelling in multiple files and choose the scope, all open files maybe, instead of what I selected there. And again, it'll show the results in the results panel at the bottom. Now, since DITA is one of the most popular authoring formats, I'll show you some DITA-specific features. So I have a DITA map here. Notice when I try to open it, I have the option to either open it in the DITA Maps Manager or the editor. I'll open it in the DITA Maps Manager. And if you're not familiar with it, this displays the map in a hierarchy form so that you can see the structure. I can also edit it or show it in the editor. Anything that I change in the map will be synchronized in the actual file, in the DITA map file. I can also create a new DITA map if I want. This would be, say, a book map. Again, I'll open it. I can start adding resources to it. This is one way to create a new file. If you start from scratch, maybe I want to pen child, add a new DITA topic. I can give it a title if I want. Choose the file name. I can continue to add. So if I want to add a sibling, I would use insert after. You can also create a new file using this file just like I did before, or using this action just like I did before. And then I could choose to insert after reference to the currently edited file, for example, and it'll open this dialog box. I can some more DITA configurations. Of course, that's not valid, but that's one way to create new maps topics. Let's go back to this one. Another way is to use a new feature called it's relatively new. It's called Fast Create Topics. Let's suppose that this section didn't already exist. So I need a section with installation on Windows, and installation on Mac. So I can choose Fast Create Topics. It gives you an example hierarchy. In my case, I'm gonna use tab to insert a child topic. You can, if you want to use a file prefix or suffix, you can choose the topic type. Notice that at this point, you can only choose one type, but I'll show you how to convert them if, for example, maybe I want these two child topics to be tasks, not topics. I'll show you how to easily convert them. So then I create them, and it adds references. Automatically in the DITA Maps Manager, if I open the map, you'll see that they're also here. Now, if I wanted to convert these to a task, there's a refactoring operation. Convert to task. Can I have a preview? I have to save first. Okay. And you'll see that it's now a task. Now going back to here, if I was to convert it from a restrictive type to a less restrictive type, you'll see that you probably have some, and even the reverse in some cases, you may have some manual adjustments to make. So I'll convert this from a task to a topic. Let's open this, and you'll see that I have some validation issues. This may be a good time to use the tags mode. So in this case, I don't want a section here, and I see that it added, well, it also shows the validation warning down here that the command element, it added a command element that obviously is not valid in a topic type. So I'll show you another helpful feature. So I can right-click that file, or I can right-click anywhere in the editing pane, choose refactoring, and in this case, it's an element type, and I want to unwrap the element. And this is, I want to unwrap CMD. Again, I can preview, see what is changing, and it basically just unwrapped my elements that are not valid in this type of document. Now, another way to create documents, and this is mostly for people that already have a lot of topics. I would say that this is how I create topics 90% of the time, because I already have a huge project. You basically find a topic, task, whatever, that has the similar structure to what you want to create, and you simply duplicate it. In my case, let's say we want to create one for Linux. And then I just make whatever changes. I forgot to save this first. So it has these same errors. But you get the idea. Always remember to save. There's a good tip for you. Actually, why don't I start over so that, because I need to show something else. Here's a fairly new feature. If you remove a file like I just did, it'll ask you if you want to keep the file open even though it no longer exists. In this case, no. Now that I've saved it, let's duplicate it again. And then I would edit it, save this time. So that's the easiest way to create a topic if you already have similar topics created. Now let me show you some profiling features. So by default, this option is not selected to show profiling attributes. If I select it, you'll see that this map and topic had some profiling. I want to change this to Linux. And also from this same drop down, I can go to profile settings. This is where you'll configure or edit profiling attributes. But you can also create condition sets. And this is so that I can filter what I'm seeing in both the DITA Maps Manager and author mode so that I can see what will end up in the output, for example. So I'll create one for Windows. Oops. Just select the Windows. One for Mac, for example. And now you'll see that those condition sets are shown here. So if I select Windows, now it'll show what's being excluded. So it'll only show the content, both in the DITA Maps Manager and in the document. It'll only show me what is going to be included in the output. Next, I'll quickly talk about some reused content. Let's turn this back off. Not that it matters. So here's a paragraph that is being reused. Again, there's various ways to do this. could use the content completion or contextual menu, or you can use this toolbar action to select it. You would choose your reusable component. The nice thing about this dialog box opening it from the toolbar is that you have this preview window. This is what I need to insert. But there's also a fairly new feature called the DITA reusable components view. So I'll choose to show that view. And then what it does is it presents all the keys and components, reusable components that are defined in the current map. So in this case, again, if I delete this, I'll go to the components tab and I can find the content I want to reuse, and all I have to do is double click it. So DITA users will definitely find this reusable component view handy. I actually use both. If it's something that I can find easily here, I'll just keep reusing it from here. But if it's something that I need to see that preview window, then I'll use the action from the toolbar. One last thing for DITA, talk about master file support. Now this is used in other document types to define the context for various operations or searches when they have included modules. But in DITA, it has a little bit more of a limited scope. It mainly provides the ability to update references when moving or renaming resources. So I'll enable master file support. You can detect and enable. I'm just going to enable so I can also show you how to add. This is my DITA map. I want to add it to my master files folder. And now it's saying that for this project, this DITA map is my root map, my master file. So if I decide to rename this file, oops. When I click enter, what happened? I'm not sure. I did something wrong, but we'll try to, oh, because I had to do it from the refactoring, sorry. So you'll see if I move the resource, I'll have the option to update the references. Say I want to move it to the topics folder. And I'll do it again because I should have showed you the preview. Again, you can preview it and it'll show you exactly what's going to change, that it's updating all references in the DITA maps and the file and the folder. Some useful actions in the tools menu or operations. I already showed you XML refactoring. It's often best to use it from the contextual menu, but you could also invoke the dialog box from here. And then when you, I don't know, let's say, let's do something more simple. Delete an attribute. Or, sorry. The next page, you'll have to define the scope. If you use the contextual menu, it'll automatically choose the scope for you, which is helpful. JSON to XML is a commonly used tool if you want to convert a JSON file to XML. Here's one. Quickly converts the JSON to XML. There's the other probably most commonly used feature here is compare files, but you could also use the contextual menu for that. Let's say I want to compare these two files. I just choose compare. And it opens a diff tool that shows you the differences. But you could also open it from the tools menu. If, for example, you're wanting to compare files from different projects. For example, I have this talking circles DITA map that this DITA project that I've been showing you. And this was like an expanded version of the talking circles sample in that samples folder. So if I compare this file from the original to the original, see, is this, yeah. I can see exactly what I changed from the original file. Now I just have one more set of things to show you. I'll show you quickly how to migrate non-XML documents to XML. So if you haven't already and there's something that you would like to request for us to show you, this would be the time to do it. So this is one of the most commonly asked questions for people that are just getting started with XML or DITA or Oxygen. Maybe they're coming from a non-XML format wanting to convert it to XML. So there's various ways to do this. One way would be to use an import action. You can import text files, Excel files, database data, or HTML files, and it'll convert it to an XML format. So for example, if I'm converting or I'm importing an HTML file, I'll convert it to XHTML. Let's see, here's one. You'll see that it's now an XHTML format. So that you can actually see it in author mode. You could also copy and paste. I have an ODT file here. Let's say I'll copy some content here and paste it in Oxygen. I'll create say a DITA topic real quick, and I'll paste, and Oxygen Smart Paste functionality will try to map elements from the other document type, the non-XML type, to whatever XML format you're using. You'll see that it's not perfect. For example, it didn't detect that this was a title. So often there's some manual adjustments to be done, but it did put this bold into a B element and this italic into an italic element. If I go back to our user guide, I think it's here, you'll see that there's a topic that explains for DITA users how to migrate various types of documents to DITA. And there's also some blog posts that could be helpful for this as well, that have even more options for this. So there's some options or methods for single documents and multiple documents. This first one is what you just saw, I just copied and pasted. Second method, for example, it's doing what I did in the first instance where I imported it to XHTML. And so all that's left is I need to convert this to DITA. And there's actually a transformation scenario for this. XHTML to, there's 4 different types you can choose from. Well, maybe topic. And now it's a DITA topic. And there's multiple document methods. For example, Let's convert multiple DocBook documents to DITA. Okay, so these are my DocBook documents. And there's a transformation scenario for this as well. So I'm going to batch transform it. In this case, DocBook to DITA. And in this case, again, there were some mapping problems, and it often adds XML comments. See, it's an XML comment, but this can easily be fixed as well. So I'm going to select those new DITA topics that it just created. Refactoring. I'll open the refactoring tool, and it's this one, delete comments. And the path is topic. Scope, selected project resources. Again, I can preview it. Oh, I have to save. Showing what it's going to do. If I finish, it has fixed my problems. Now, what if you're not wanting to convert to DITA? There's another option that we have. So back in our user guide, in the add-on section, we have a batch converter add-on. And this gives you the possibility of converting from various document formats, all of these different options. In our case, we'll do, I don't know, Markdown to DocBook, for example. So what we need to do first is install the add-on. So I went to Help, Install New Add-ons, the default update site. And it's this batch converter add-on. Simply need to follow the instructions, accept the end user license agreement, and it says that I need to restart. Okay, so now when I go back to the project view, let me find some markdown documents. Again, I can do a batch operation here. Select the resources, and now I have this option in the contextual menu, batch converter. And I'm going from Markdown to DocBook. Oh, sorry, I chose the wrong option. Markdown to DocBook. And I didn't pay attention to where it was saving it. I need to do it again. Getting started, sample. Oh, so it's automatically saved it in the output folder. And you see that it's there now, DocBook documents. So that was the extent of the things on my list to show you. Sorry, I went a little bit too long. And so now it's time to switch controls back to George, and hopefully he can answer some questions.
Hi, Stephen. Yes, I think also Radu had a similar problem when with the tips and tricks session, because when you start, showing oxygen, you can go for hours without realizing, for an entire day, I guess, without
Yeah, like I
realizing
said,
the time.
there's so many different things that you can do and so many different types of users. So
So one question was which version, I know that you already specified that, but which version of Oxygen are you showing?
oops, this is
I think you,
21.0,
yeah,
but I can
the
go to
latest.
about and show you, see, 21.0.
Okay. Um, do you need to set a preference for automatic validation? And I think if you go to the preferences options and
There is
filter validation or something like that, under
so
document validation,
yeah,
uh, you have this enable automatic validation option, but that's enabled by default, right? So basically by default, Oxygen will automatically validate the files with the specified schema. We also provide something that's called a validation scenario. So on a document, one can, like an XML document, if you go to an XML document, you can say configure validation scenario, and
here,
and then you can specify when you say new, for instance.
oops, sorry.
Yeah, so if you say new validation scenario, by default we show, the validate the current document with the detected schema, right? So that's the default, and you see that you have this checkbox that says this is part of the automatic validation or not. And then you can choose, whether a specific validation unit is part of that or not, because you can add additional validation units if you want to. So then you can say, validate with one schema, with another schema, and some of them can be part of the automatic validation or not. If they are not part of the automatic validation, they are used when you manually invoke the validate action from the toolbar, for instance, right? Or with the shortcut and so on. So that's how it works. But by default, the automatic validation is enabled. Again, we had a number of questions, I mentioned that this is the most frequently asked question, whether the webinar is recorded or not. Yes, the webinar is recorded and the recording will be available. Another question was whether Oxygen will auto-save a file. And I know that you addressed that, but you can maybe show that again in the options preferences. Again, if you filter on save, probably that's the easiest way, and you find the save, and then you can say automatically save, I don't know, 1 minute, every minute, and so on.
And you can also decide to, every time you save, make a backup copy. I think I mentioned that it automatically added backup files, probably because I did something wrong when I was saving. But you can also choose to make a backup copy every time you save with this option. And you can choose to validate your document before saving it too. That may be helpful for new users.
There was also a question whether when you edit an attribute and you are in the author mode, whether that reflects in the author mode immediately, or do you need to reload the document and something like that. And because the user experienced that that change does not appear immediately when editing in the attributes view, but that
Wow, it
should
should.
happen actually. Uh,
Yeah.
so if you experience a problem, maybe you should describe us that specific situation, and you can double check with that. But Oxygen by default, when you edit an attribute in the attributes view, that reflects in the outer mode. Like if Steven will set a profiling attribute or something, that will automatically be, but you can do that with the attributes panel, Steven, right? So if you change that in the attributes panel, for instance, removing that, or yeah, you see that the outer mode should reflect that immediately. If not, then it's an issue, and then we need to find out, the exact steps that you are using and so on. So it's better to contact us and provide as many details as possible to understand, what's going on in that case.
One thing that I forgot to mention is you also have an in-place attributes editor if you want. So if you hit Alt Enter on any element or whatever, then same thing, you get this in-place editor, show you what's valid here. Again, what's valid for option or for values. So that may be helpful too for people. Again, that's Alt Enter on any element.
Okay. Does the auto backup replace the existing backup or create an additional backup? I think the default implementation that we have will keep only one backup file, not like multiple backup files. So there will be only one file that's the last successful save of that file, right? The last
We can
backup.
try it. Okay, so I'll save this, but I'm not sure where it saves it. Does it show in that options? Or do I need to restart?
No, you should not need to restart. It should be in the same folder, but you need to refresh, I think, the
project view, yeah. Well, I can look here. So wherever that.
But
Oh, here it is, right here. So you
yeah.
have care.dita.backup. So here, let me make another change and then save it again. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so it doesn't create another one. It saves over the top of the existing backup, I guess.
So it will keep the last successfully saved content, basically. There was a question also about is there a way to view the XPath to the element via cursor placement? So we have the XPath on the toolbar. There's an XPath view, and that has an option in the, if you click the options next to that, says XPath update on cursor move. If you enable that, you'll be able to move the car at some location, and the XPath in that on the toolbar will reflect the current position, right? So that's how we work. And I think there's also a copy XPath contextual action, if I remember correctly. Maybe not in the outer mode, I don't know, but
maybe in text
for
mode.
sure it is in the text mode, I
think.
Copy
XPath.
Yeah, that will give you the XPath for the current element.
If you want to copy it. You also notice that the value in the XPath toolbar is exactly the same as the breadcrumb, right? But for example, here you see that it has a little bit more information for example, a processing instruction.
Yeah, and I think also if you click, like on a below, like on the third row or something like that, it may say, just not at the beginning, but more to the end of the topic. It may say
So it
like
shows
it's the third
attributes.
entry, or below, Stephen, at the end of the document, maybe it will say not like on an entry in a table, but it may show, I don't know if it
I
shows
see.
like the third entry or the fourth entry, or it's just, I think we just put like a location path, and then you can basically, if you run this, you will see all those entries at the same level with this one, or something like that, or all the rows at the same level with that one. So the idea was to be in a way useful, so you can select all the nodes matching that structure. Can you copy and paste elements? Yes, of course. You can just, you can triple click, for instance, in the text mode on an element to select the entire element. There is also a contextual action that will say select element or select parent and so on. And yeah, so on the select, you have element, content, attributes, parent, and then you can copy paste them. In the author mode, you can also copy and paste from the breadcrumb, maybe you can, or from the outline, you can immediately select an entire element and copy and paste them. So that works easily. There was also a question that I didn't really understood about are there client keys for each element? And I think after I asked for some clarification. I think it's about IDs for an element, but in some context, in some CMS context, they are called element keys. So Oxygen has support for instance, for DITA to generate IDs. So you can automatically say, that you want to generate IDs for some specific elements, and then Oxygen will automatically generate IDs for those elements. It's
ID options.
Yeah, so then you can specify, the format for the ID and the elements that you want the IDs to be automatically generated for. Yeah, so
yeah, so
I
you
think
can add
that's,
more, remove, I guess, if you don't want
yeah,
IDs
and
on any of these.
Oxygen automatically, I think, on a copy paste in the same document will automatically change the ID to avoid an ID conflict, for instance, on some elements.
Yeah, I think that's this option. I'm not sure what happens if you deselect it, but I do remember documenting this, so it's in the user guide.
Another question was, if I'm cloning a DITA topic, how do I create a new topic ID? Basically, the topic ID in a DITA topic is irrelevant from a DITA point of view, but you can just change, edit that ID attribute and on the topic, and then you so what happens when you duplicate a topic? Probably we keep the same ID, but you can just edit the ID attribute and you have a new one if you want to.
It does keep it, but and I don't want to switch to our user guide project because I would have to do all sorts of things because I tried to make my computer in default mode as if I just installed it. But we have a special schematron rule that says that the topic ID must equal the file name. And so when I duplicate a topic, it'll give me a validation error saying that the topic ID doesn't equal the file name because it kept the topic ID from the previous one. And then we have a quick fix created so that it'll automatically switch that topic ID to the file name.
This is a question that I do not really understand. Is it possible to replace all types by their definition so the structure does not need to reference a type, but all type attributes are already expanded attributes? Attributes are already expanded. So sorry if you can provide maybe some additional details, then we can try to respond to this question, but I'm not sure what it means.
Are they talking about
But
when we converted the document types, the DITA topic types?
not sure. But if
Oh,
you have, like a default attribute, like the class attribute, yes. So someone's follow-up was that he'll send a little example, an example of that. Yeah. So if you do not have time now, you can send us at support@oxygenxml.com an example, and we can follow up on that. I was thinking that maybe like the default class attribute, if you double click on that in the attributes view, then that will become instantiated in the document. So you see, when you double click on the attribute, that was the default, but you need to go into the source mode to actually see what's going on, right? So in the source mode, you can see that the class becomes instantiated, right? Because otherwise it's a default. Like if you go on the body element, for instance, select the body element, and then if you double click, you see it's topic body here. It's a default attribute. If you double click on that, it will become, an actual attribute. If you double click on that in the attributes panel, right? So then once you click outside of that, so it actually exit the editing stage, you commit that edit, basically it becomes an instantiated attribute. But
I
I'm not
see.
sure if that's what the question was about.
Yeah, if I revert, so yeah, again, so if I double click on that, it automatically adds the expanded attribute value.
Okay, can you briefly describe DITA? Let me try to do that, but I'll come back to this at the end when I get the control, so I can show you also a bit my screen. How to convert PowerPoint files to XHTML or EPUB? Well, Oxygen does not provide a ready-to-use solution for converting PowerPoint to XHTML or EPUB, as far as I know. You can use the smart paste support that we have, maybe, to copy paste from PowerPoint files and paste that content into XHTML, for instance. And then, yeah, that should work, I guess.
I'm curious to know what happens if this is using LibreOffice, not PowerPoint, but I don't know, is there a XML file here that, no, it doesn't like it. Very ugly.
No, if you open that in, like the PowerPoint file or the LibreOffice file and copy from the LibreOffice, that will place in clipboard XHTML basically, and then you paste that into DITA or into the XHTML editor in Oxygen. We should be able to keep that XHTML content basically.
I wondered if it worked similar to like docx. This isn't something that I showed, but if I go back to the samples, let's see. Okay, come on, load. So we do have like a docx sample, and it opens it in the archive browser, and then you can open the file and format it, and in author mode it will show something that's similar to for example, a Word document. I wasn't sure if it would do that for PowerPoint, but apparently not.
No, we yeah. Can a Word non-XML doc be migrated to XML document? Well, there again, the smart paste will help you with that. So if you copy from a Word document and paste into a DITA or XHTML document, you should get some results. There are also some solutions like DITA Open Toolkit plugin that allows to convert from Word to DITA, for instance, that you may try.
And what I just did, so if you can save the document as docx, like this method shows, then you can open it in the archive browser view, like I just did, and you can run this built-in transformation scenario, docx to DITA. So I have this as docx now. I don't know, what do I, in the project view, if I, let's show all.
You can use the filter.
Yeah. There it is, docx to DITA. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, another question was, can you copy an entire doc with tags so you can edit that doc to become a new document? Well, basically, you can copy paste a document and that will duplicate the document, rename it, and then you can, have the same content under a different document and you can start editing that. But of course, also if you select the entire content of a document and paste it in another document, you will also get that content. Yeah, so you can copy the entire content of the document and that will be with the structure, of course, and then you can paste that to a new document and then edit that further. That works. Will Oxygen interface with MySQL? We have actually a database perspective along with the XLT and XQuery perspective, and we have connectors for databases, including MySQL. So yes, you can use Oxygen to run SQL against MySQL database.
By the way, George, I just read that, so that document.xml file, that's what I have to transform to convert it to DITA. That's why it didn't work. So it's this one. Let's see what happens this time.
Another question was
still didn't seem to work. I'll have to play around with that.
Well, these are basically third-party transformations that we just include in Oxygen for DITA, and in some cases they depend a lot on the Word document structure. If the structure contains, you see you may need to do some manual reconfiguration to map docx styles to DITA. So if your document does not use styles and there is no mapping from those styles to DITA elements, you will not get a real DITA content, because if there will be a magic solution to convert Word to DITA, there will be no need for DITA, basically. My question is, when DITA file created and when we have to create XML file, .xml file and .dita file, right? So, well, DITA is also on XML, and maybe it's time for me to answer that question. If I can briefly describe DITA. So DITA XML, you can have DITA under the XML extension. It's just a convention that some DITA files or DITA files use the DITA extension. So, but you can use .xml extension if you want for DITA as well. So can you briefly describe DITA? I have actually this slide from one of the presentation that I gave earlier at the conference. And it was about using DITA in a docs as code scenario where some people use Markdown and HTML. And maybe this is a good example to show, DITA is an XML language that has the the base structure for content. So the base structure for content means you have paragraphs as blocks, sections maybe, inline content like bold, italic, underlines, and so on, some links, and that's the basic structure that you find in Markdown, in HTML, and it's present also in DITA. Actually, in DITA, it looks quite similar to HTML. Then DITA adds the semantic markup layer where you have different, it organizes the semantics in different domains, for instance. Like you have specific elements for software domain, for programming domain, for hazard statement, and so on, and different document types. Like rather than a generic topic document, you have a task, you have a troubleshooting topic, you have maybe some learning objects, and so on. And then it has this part that rather than having a static document, the document can be generated. And here you have the reuse functionality. So rather than placing some content within your document, you just make a reference to the content that is stored maybe in like a warehouse or a reusable library, and say, I want to bring that note here, that warning note in this particular topic, right? So rather than writing the content, you just have a reference, and then when that topic is actually used, that reference is expanded with the actual content. Another example is that profiling that Stephen presented, when you say, oh, this block, this paragraph applies to a specific product, for instance, and not everything. And then in addition to this, there's also the support for metadata that DITA provides. So I hope I gave you some idea, what DITA is. Moving on, here is a list of the upcoming events where you can meet our team. There are on the events page on our website. There are also, you can find all the webinars, and we plan to add some more webinars in the near future. It will be great if you can provide us feedback on what topics you want to see covered in webinars. So this, the evolution of technical communication, Markup UK, Technical Communication UK, LavaCon, DITA Europe, DITA OT Day is an event that we organize for the DITA Open Toolkit in connection with DITA Europe. It's a free event that you can attend. And the Technical Communication World by TCOM. These are the events that you can meet our team. We do sponsor and support other events as well. For instance, the Balisage conference, we sponsor that, but unfortunately we do not, will not be there this year. And if you have, follow-up questions, feel free to get in touch with us, either on some of our support channels, on our support email address, on Twitter, for instance, and we'll be happy to respond to your questions even after the webinar. So thank you again for staying with us. I see that a lot of you actually stayed this additional hour with us, so thank you, and hope to see you either in person at one of these events, or maybe virtually again at one of our next webinars. So thanks, and see you soon. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.
Goodbye.